All right, so we're just starting here, and normally I would introduce the guest's name, but this is we'll get into this a little bit. So I have to ask, what are the top five names in the running right now, if I can, if you can reveal that, or like, what are some of your options you're pursuing, if you will?
So, great question. I am definitely in this name change campaign moment. And so far, I've been using A Girl You Might Know on Instagram.
Yeah,
And I kind of
yeah,
like that. It's a phrase more than an actual name.
sure.
But I'm considering it because it could maybe be a fun brand name. I don't know. But other names, I'm kind of diving into my family history because I'd love to have something
Mm,
meaningful. So my
yeah,
mom's name is Donna. I love that.
that's awesome.
And her middle name is Ray, which I
Ooh,
love because it reminds me of Star Wars.
yeah,
And
that's super
then,
cool.
yeah, my sister's middle name is Grace. And I think, carrying your life with grace is important. So I love that too.
Yeah,
And then I like,
yeah.
I like my dog's name, Winnie. So those are kind of the top for now.
Those are all so good. Oh my gosh. Well, let's just choose it now. Let's just, dive into this now exclusive, like
The pressure is on.
Ray, Gray and Race, Gray and Race, Ray and Grace is awesome. Winnie Grace, but then you don't want to be your dog's exact name,
I know.
right? That's tough. It sucks that your dog is already awesome, right? You can't like take her name.
I know. I feel
It's
like
a,
it would be tough because I'm like, Winnie commands her name very well. And it's like, who am I to
yeah,
come in here and take it?
yeah, totally. But then again, Winnie might understand because it's like in reality, and you can talk about more of this because we'll just dive into it. It was very casual. We're just diving in. Is like this is just for your online brand, right? Like in personality, like your friends can call you your name, right? So tell me a little bit more about that, or if you can, like, what's that look? Tell me
Totally.
everything that happened. Like, actually, no. Let's be good podcasters.
Okay. I'm
Tell
down
me
with
a
that.
little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
Oh, well,
Let's get the backstory on like what I know you've been a dress designer. One of my favorites, a lot of my brides' favorites, dress designers in the world. You were on Say Yes to the Dress, which is crazy. I'm probably the only large white bearded dude that's ever watched that show.
no, you would not be. Trust me.
Okay, good. So tell me a little bit more about yourself and your history and like how you got into dress designing.
Absolutely. Well, I grew up in the Bay Area of California, and my
Okay.
grandmother taught me to sew and bake at a young age. So I was very exposed to creativity and just, putting yourself out there imaginatively. And
Mm,
I've always carried that with me throughout my studies. And I'm also a huge academic. I love math and science. And
okay.
so I was always just like immersing myself in a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But I was also of the mindset of structure and formula. And my dad was a general surgeon growing up. So I actually always thought I was going to be a doctor and
Okay.
go toward like the medicine route and helping people. And all the while still kind of entertaining this passion of design and illustration work and that kind of stuff. And when I got to Cornell, my gymnastics coach was like, at Cornell, you can be anything you want in the world. What would you want
Mm,
to be? And I said, I'd want to be a wedding dress designer. And he's like, oh, we have a fiber science program. And I was like, what is fiber science? And take me to
yeah.
it. It was like this perfect alchemy of science and design. And that
Yeah.
really was the first time in my life I saw design as a viable profession.
Mm,
And I think it's interesting because a lot of people that want to pursue something creative or artistic are always held back by this mindset of, oh, there's already too many people in the space, or, oh, I'm not
yeah.
connected to the fashion industry. And part of my story is just sharing with people that it's okay to kind of have those doubts. You don't have to be like,
Yeah.
I'm all in on this. And if, I don't make it, that's not an option, so it's like, okay to
Yeah.
dabble. And then, yeah, I went right straight into the fashion industry out of college and had a great opportunity working for Priscilla of Boston. And then I went from there to a house of brands called JLM Couture. And I'd been there almost for the past 10 years. But yeah, I mean, right now I'm in a very complex situation, and
Mm,
it's a long story, but
sure.
I definitely can say that what I did for a living was my dream, and I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, no, totally. That makes perfect sense. I wonder, yeah, like I've had a few brides who are actually in fashion. I think one went to FIT in New York,
Yep,
like
great
Fashion
school.
Institute.
Hmm.
And that is like 10 years ago, that used to be the photographer, right? You'd be like, oh, photography's kind of rare. There's not a lot of them. There's a barrier to entry, buying the gear, all that kind of stuff. Oh, you have to have a dark room, all that kind of stuff. Maybe not 10 years, 20 years. Whereas now, like, the person who made your coffee this morning is a photographer as well. Like everybody is doing it. But as far as like actual fashion designers, like, at least in my mind, like that still feels so rare, which maybe it's because I'm out of the industry, but like I'll gladly encourage anybody who needs to go in fashion and be like, no, you should do it. Because I can name 0 designers like you, and then I can name like, Gucci and Louis Vuitton, right? Which they're not even the actual people, right? At some level.
Yeah.
And so that's a complex thing, for sure. What is so you've been going through some stuff, and we can talk about the short version of that or however long you want to go, but essentially you're not designing right now currently, right? Like you're not making stuff.
Correct.
Or what's that look like? What's your best
So the situation I'm in, I was sued by the house of brands I worked for 10 years, and I've been through a lot of trauma. But ultimately, right now, I'm not allowed to use my own name due to a contract that I signed at 25. And it's a situation I don't wish on anyone, but I'm a bottomless optimist, or a eternal optimist, I'll say. And I feel like it's important to always look for the things that can never be taken from you and the things you can hold tightly to, as opposed to looking at what you don't have. So in this time period, I have my creativity. I'm still doing things to bring joy and tap into that imaginative part of my brain every day. But I am on the defense fighting a legal case. And, this is not my expertise whatsoever, but all I can do is speak the truth and speak from my experience. And it's been incredible to see the support system. And because it's been so limiting, I've looked for solutions in change. And I'm somebody that welcomes change. And part of that is saying, okay, well, what is my next step as an identity? And I'm of course looking for a brand name and something that I can represent in a business sense. But because I'm a creative, I feel like you really do have to connect to it. So during this whole process where I'm trying to pick a new name, my fiance and my friends and family have been really supportive in like, okay, let's test out this name for a day. Like, how does this work? Do I look like a Ray? Like, could I go for this name? And it really is limiting because I can't even use a derivative of my original name. So, people have like, oh, well, you should just swap the first letters of your name and then there you go. And I can't even do that. So I really need to fully commit to it in a way. And I don't know if that means fully legally changing my name, but I'm definitely open to it if it means if I need it in the sense of connecting to it, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, totally. That's going to be super tough because, I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, like you joined this house when you were 25, right? And it's one of those weird things where I'm not trying to be that person. Like, I know for me, I was not that smart at 25. I'm barely that smart now, right? Like I'm just like, and you're signing contracts, right? Or you're doing different things. And I remember when I had my first office job, this is standard now. It was like this, and again, stop me if we touch on anything we can't talk about, but I signed this thing when I worked for a job in office. I was like, hey, anything you come up with while you're here, that's ours. Like this kind of intellectual property thing. Right. And then it really comes down to like, how willing is that place to enforce it, right? So I worked for a church, and I'm like, oh, that church is not gonna, like, what would they come after me for? Like, whatever. Like, I didn't invent the Bible. Versus situations where, you're in and other people's where it's like they, and it is like people make money off of people's names, right? Like I make money off of Mason Photography, and other people off of, Bridget Jones' Diary or Bridget Jones' Photography or whatever. And it's like, it's super complex, but then it sucks because obviously it sucks, but it's like, that's your name, and you lose it. And, but you like, no one would have known. At least I don't understand. I don't know. I'm not trying to be weird about it.
Yeah. And it's also interesting because with the social media element to it, this is a whole new territory. And, as a designer growing up, you hear these stories of people losing rights to their brand name and, they can't go into that space using that name. But with social media, we all open accounts and we use our names to identify who we are as a human being, not to say like, oh, I'm opening a brand account. That is not something I did. I just joined Instagram because my best friend was like, get on the gram. It's where everyone is.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
so it wasn't like this whole grand strategy or anything. And,
Mm.
the idea that I've been using my name to identify who I am and share my life is one thing. And then to feel like all of a sudden that's jeopardized is really, really scary. But to your point, we all have contracts in our lives. And, you even look at like the Facebook terms of services and you just, check the box. You don't actually read through it. And so at least by sharing more of my story, my hope is that young creatives, even the ones that are most eager to, get their shot, I just want to shoot my shot and we'll figure out the rest later. Like that's definitely a mentality a lot of young creatives have. And I guess my hope is that by sharing, more people will be cognizant of protecting their rights, protecting their creativity, protecting their names, that kind of stuff that we just we don't take it for granted, but I think we just hope that would never happen, or that, like you said, that the company would never pursue that, type of thing,
right, or
and
enforce it.
So we all have to take risks. We all have to take chances. But I will agree, like at 25, I went to Cornell and I studied science and math and all this stuff, but I was not apt to like law and contracts. And this was new for me. Absolutely. So I can totally relate to that.
Yeah. I wonder, we have a few photographers on our team and it's always this like tension where like, and it depends on the person, but there's like I want to ask, for people who are curious, like they always say like everybody has a number, right? But that number changes as people grow, and life changes and our needs and what we want change. But, like some of my photographers on our team, they're experienced enough and they've been in the business long enough to where they're like, we might not let them use their images that they shoot for me, but the environment we have is like we still share that person shot it, that person created it, right? But they just did it for us, kind of like a newspaper. Like we like to be like, hey, this is our editor Billy or whatever it might be. And we're like, okay, great. And that photographer might be totally fine with the pros and cons of like, yeah, that's great. Like I did create that. It was like on assignment essentially for that thing. I know it's not mine, but there's, balance. Like we know they made it.
Right.
And then, but they also get paid a lot more than maybe other, team members, photographers do in our area from what I've found out. And that was kind of my thing. I was like, hey, I want to eliminate any of the conversations as a business owner, but I was like, I will pay you a lot more than you would get paid, double or triple than what they would get paid elsewhere. And then you have other people, photographers maybe are newer, right? They are like, hey, if I take an awesome photo, it's going to change my portfolio, right? Like some photographers, they're waiting for that one shot that's going to level them up to the next thing. And they're like, hey, I need that, and, there's a balance. So it's like, all right, I'll pay you less, but you can use it. Or, it's like different pros and cons on that thing, but that's still tough, and I think like, is that like, and again, like I said, you're the smartest person I know, smartest person I've talked to all year.
Oh my gosh,
like
so nice.
How does that, like, is there something where you'd be like, hey, it's okay or whatever, or which I know is a dumb question, but again, I've never been through this, I don't know, like how does that, is there a solution or is the solution like, hey, I'm trying to find a new name, as much as you can say?
Yeah, I think right now my two biggest things are transparency and plain language contracts. Because when it comes to creating content and you're working with a team, you want everyone to feel acknowledged and not like it's just the property of one person. I mean, when you really think about, for example, a wedding image, majority of the time, and this is typically the hope, that image is owned by the bride and groom, or the bride and bride, or the groom and groom. It's like it's it's their image, it's their day. And a lot of times the photographers will want it to be owned by them because they took the picture. And so as long as you have an understanding of what you want out of your special day, and if you want the rights to your photograph,
Yeah.
Some photographers are completely on board with that, and others, it is a piece of art for their portfolio. And so as long as you
Yeah.
just have the transparency, that's what's important. But then you also
Mhm.
have so many other things that go into that image, like you have the dress, you have the hair and makeup, you have the accessories.
Yeah.
And I really do see it as this team effort. And with Instagram, what I think is great is it gives you the opportunity to give credit to
Yeah.
everyone, and so that's what I've
Yeah.
always tried to do, is to make people feel acknowledged. And as long as people are feeling represented, I think that's what's important. But it's when you get these, if there's hidden agendas or if there is an attempt to, I'm gonna get them on this later. It's like going into a partnership like that or a piece of art. It's never
Yeah.
really what you want. You want to be working with people that want to give credit and want everyone to feel a part of
Sure.
it, and not
Yeah.
that it's just like owned by one thing and they can come get you. So just speaking
Yeah.
generally and from my opinion,
Yeah.
like that's kind of where I stand. And going
Yeah.
forward, that's kind of what I want to champion.
I love that. Yeah, because it's like things are changing where one, if something does come out that is bad or feels weird or feels icky to how we're moving as like society wise, like we usually call it out, right? Or like if I'll use a fake example, but if like Whole Foods started selling plastic straws again, right, for the right price, we're like, no, what's that? People who are
That's
against
a great
that
example.
yeah, people might be weird or whatever, all that kind of stuff. And you're like, what's going on? And people want the people they buy from, people they know, like, and trust, right, as business people, to like, there needs to be accountability, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be everything is public, but like you need to have a good answer for a lot of questions, and be ready and be transparent and be willing to that, because like what we've seen as society, I always think there's people who, I'm an optimist, but there's definitely an element where people, even ourselves will be prone to do a bad thing or be prone to do the bad thing if there weren't guidelines and restrictions or, speeding in your car or whatever. Like it's fun to drive a vehicle, right? Like, but there is an element of that transparency that we want to have and we look for and millennials are looking for. And then, support. Like I think the first time I got approached I took a photo of a couple in front of a mural here in DC, and it was cool. And like, it was doing great on Instagram. And in my mind, I was like, that was marketing, right, for our company. And then the mural artist found it and said, hey, will you credit me for the mural behind it?
Oh,
and
yeah.
I had never, I think there was like part of me that was like, what? Honestly, like instantly I was like, what's going on here? And I had to like go back and forth at that time thinking like, in reality, I wouldn't have taken or posted this photo if the mural wasn't there.
Right.
So I'm like, I needed the mural person. But then I was like, when it goes to weddings and it's like dresses, I was like, oh, they would have worn something, right? Unless they're not wearing anything.
Right.
Which is a different kind of photography, but whatever. But I'm like, but again, it's like, what do I want in the world? Like you just said. And it's like, I want dress designers to feel hype too. I want florists to feel hype. I want everybody, and it's like, I ask for all those annoying questions, for my couples. I'm like, hey, who did your dress? Who did your jewelry? Who did all this? Because I'm like, we're in the celebration business. So like, let's celebrate, what's happening and celebrate everybody and celebrate this team, like from the florist to the designer to the venue, whatever. So now for the most part, I'm not perfect at it, but I try to pop some credit, for everybody, because it's usually people you want to work with again.
Yeah.
Like, this life is too short for us to like start and end tiny relationships every year or wedding season or corporate season or working season to be like I'm in my 30s now and I'm like, let's just have friends for a long time. Like it sounds dumb, but I'm like, let's keep great people around. I don't know. So that's a little blabbing, but I get where you're coming from.
Yeah. And it's community driven for sure. But to your point earlier, I think people are looking for purpose and a social awareness, because even if you're not really impassioned with politics or, you're not outspoken, it doesn't mean you have to be forced into that. But I do think that businesses now do have a responsibility of making people feel acknowledged and included. And however you can do that and whatever makes sense for you, it's worth incorporating. And it's interesting because it really has changed over the short period of time. And I think social media has helped in that aspect, because
Totally.
this idea of call out culture, it can obviously be a very scary thing, but at the same time, it really is holding people accountable, and it makes you
Yeah.
think in advance, okay, what is my footprint here, and how do I want to make people feel? And yes, we want to share creativity and our products and our, what we're doing with our lifestyles, but we also want to connect with people. The first part of social media is social, and
Yeah.
the connection of people is the most important aspect of that, I think. But
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I think that's a big deal. And it gives companies and people like, a choice to be like, hey, actually, either I don't want to be transparent about this, or I don't care about this, or we don't launch. And then the consumer can say, okay, well, I'm going to go somewhere else, or whatever, which can be sad, right? Because, it's like never meet your heroes, right? Kind of thing.
yeah.
And this is totally off topic from anything we're talking about, but like there's going to be an issue on everything, right? So it's like, I love Apple and the iPhone, but I know there are some complicated questions about making it and factory processes to get to technology that we're using, right? To talk on a computer, right? So it's what does that look like, right? This thing that I use to empower me and other people is being made in a way that supposedly might not be that great, right? And it's all these things, where like your favorite pair of shoes or whatever, especially in fashion, right? It's fast fashion.
Definitely. Yep.
This world I know nothing about, but I know like, 2 articles worth about nothing. That's tough too. But I think it's like that transparency is the idea that we're pursuing better. Nobody's asking anybody to be perfect per se,
Right.
but it's like, what are you pursuing? Like, are you just fine with whatever, or are you actually chasing it down?
Yeah, I love that, because we've all made mistakes, and we've all, interpreted things a certain way that we might interpret differently. And I think the bigger message here is that we are getting better. We are becoming more aware. We are changing for the better. And that's just what you hope, and forgiveness is one thing. If somebody did something a long time ago, like we've all been there. But I think too, it's that seeing the progress and knowing that people are willing to acknowledge, take accountability, and change is what matters, and changing for the better. So you're very on point with what our last conversation was.
Yeah. Trying to be. Well, it's such a funny thing. So there's like, and this podcast is very open and honest, obviously, but there's the element of like, there's an elephant in the room and we can talk about it, right? But it's not a bad elephant, right? Like you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's like I want to give as much information and value as we can about like what we're learning. But that's what one of my other questions I was going to ask is on my list of like, this year, we'll say 2021, like, what are you personally learning and enjoying, and like, what are you doing with your time these days that you can share, or is it all caught up in this like, because I imagine it's like ebbs and flows of some days you're like, all right, let's do this, and other days you're like, what the frick? I can't use my name. I don't know what that's like. And you're a podcaster as well. So you're like, how's that all work?
Oh gosh. Well, the podcast, I will say, my fiance and I started it in the pandemic, and it was something we'd wanted to do for a really long time. Even since the day we met, we're like, we should have a podcast, So
awesome.
We love being able to have that time to start it. And it's been really cathartic, because I think the more conversations you have, the more you communicate, the better. And inviting people into that space and making them feel like they belong and tell their story. This is all very good stuff. So that has been a big blessing for me. But to what you just said, it's like, I have good days and bad days right now. And I try to only be positive in what I'm representing, in a public sense, because I've always been somebody that wants people to feel like I represent myself, that it's a safe space for you to come into. And it can be a dance at times, but it's hard not to be super consumed in a lawsuit where you feel like so much is being taken from you. Sure. And my fiance and I have definitely made a conscious effort to try to put it in a box and say like, this is happening, but we're going to keep it in this box. And when we open the box, we're going to try to be as productive as we can be and careful with our mindset, because when you start to really worry, it consumes you, but outside of that box, we have all these things that we know we can do, and that like the podcast and, just personal growth, things that are important for us in moving the ball forward as a couple. We're engaged, but we haven't really gotten a chance to think about our wedding and think about those things. So we're like, well, why don't we start kind of opening those conversations and looking at things to look forward to? So with everyone, I think the past year has really been a challenge. I mean, that is like the understatement of the year. And so we're all dealing with baggage in different ways, but it's almost like you have to kind of look at your baggage and take inventory almost every day and say, okay, what do I want to unpack today? And what do I want to carry with me? And who are the people that are going to help me unpack? And who are the people that maybe aren't going to be supporting it? And why, make sure we're not wasting our energy on that. So, it's like a metaphor, but that's kind of where I am every day right now.
No, I get that. That makes perfect sense. I heard something the other day ironically on another podcast where it was like, it was just good information. I feel like for even us, entrepreneurs who are used to doing, we're used to creating, we're used to making, we're used to sharing, used to showing, all that kind of thing. And people listening are very much like that. And, at least in the wedding world, like all of our stuff got delayed, rescheduled, or canceled,
Yes. Yeah.
And, it's one of those things where this person was basically saying, like, it's still a crazy time. Just by you surviving, you're doing enough. You're good enough. And it's good advice, right? Because seldom do I want to think about that. Seldom want to be like, nope, I didn't get enough done today, but it's like whatever pace we had in 2019 and whatever dreams we had in 2019 and all this kind of stuff. It's everybody's first pandemic. Like, it's so weird and obscure. And now we have like a year or so of practice, but it's, we cannot hold ourselves accountable in the same way, to what our dreams were in 2019. We can hope for the future, right? Like lights at the end of the tunnel, be positive, be optimistic, like push for good things. But, I think that makes a lot of sense for sure. And it's tough. Yeah. I can't imagine, just like the trying to think of best ways. I assume, well, you can just tell me how it feels, but it's like how you just have something weighing on you every day, right? Or whatever.
Absolutely. There's a dark, gloomy cloud. Yeah. Every day. And it's like, okay, let's look for the rainbow where we can. And it's cheesy, but you have to make a conscious effort to do it. And I think just even growing up in gymnastics, a lot happened to me when I was a child. And I just feel like when you develop that resilience muscle, there's a tendency to ignore certain things. And I feel like it's important to take time to process and to take inventory and talk about things that are helpful and therapeutic and that. And then you can make room to say, okay, I'm going to choose happiness today. I'm going to choose to be positive. I'm going to acknowledge these things, but I'm also going to keep moving the ball forward. And with the pandemic and everything, it has definitely enlightened people and forced them to look at things in their life that do bring joy and where, your focus goes, energy flows. So if you are living in a state of worry and fear, there's a huge difference than if you're going to say, oh, look, I saw a dog today. Like that was exciting. You can really look for those little things. Oh my gosh. Like, my car started, in the cold, like some days it doesn't start, like that's a win, like to look at those little things. I think it's important, the little joys, little moments, rather than, oh, this is consistently happening to me. But then you still, like when you're in a lawsuit and you're defending yourself, like you have to be willing to put your best foot forward. And not second guess yourself about your experience and your story. And that can be a really hard thing to do. My hope overall is just, the more we share, the more we story tell, maybe you are paving the way for someone else to be brave and to not second guess, but just be more aware of the potential in things and why it's good to get ahead of things and make it as clear as possible.
Yeah. How does one look on the bright side? Kind of like we were just saying, like, how does somebody choose joy and like, for a tough year and tough times and tough things going on, right? And all kinds of like, you've been through a lot and, so like, how do you be like, all right, like, how do I choose it? How do you choose which baggage? How do you choose that joy? How do you choose that being on the bright side?
Really good question. And I think everyone definitely chooses joy differently. For me, growing up in gymnastics too, I would you'd have bad days, you fall on the beam, you would cry, your coach is screaming at you, like whatever it is, like you process it and you kind of move on and you keep moving the ball forward. And so I think progress is one of the most important things to recognize in your life that'll help bring joy to you. So, whether you are a big fitness person or you like getting energy out, like I see that as one little point of progress to say, I have an endorphin high from my workout. I feel really good, like good for me. Like that's a good way to to carry momentum into your day. And then also to look at the stimulus around you, like, are you consuming foods that are making you feel good, or do you find that you get really depressed after a glass of wine, and so maybe avoid that, or, maybe you get really happy after a glass of wine, just to be really mindful of those little things that make a difference in your life and your state of being. And for me too, my fiance and I, we love throwing on great music. Happy music gets you in the mood. It's a simple thing. And then also expressing gratitude. And that can be such a general statement, but just to look at the things you do have and the support system, the friends, the health, all these things that if they were jeopardized or you didn't have them, like I think of days when if you're sick and you're like, all you want is like, I wish I could go back to a day where I just feel great about myself and I don't feel sick, and to have it and to acknowledge it is so great because it can always be worse. And I know that's like a negative thing to say, but in a way it's like, look at what you do have, so stay there in that category as much as you can.
Yeah, it's like think obviously it's hard to tell somebody how to think, right? Be like, think positive, but it's like focus.
It's like, what do you mean? It sounds like baloney.
yeah, totally. People are just like, oh, I'm turning this off. They're like, I did not choose this episode to listen to this, but I like it. So it is what it is. But choosing joy or telling somebody how to think or whatever, and you're just like, gratitude, starting with gratitude is what you're saying, and like being thankful for what you do have. Like, so whether that is like clothes on your back, breath in your lungs, the freedom to choose something, hopefully, whether you want to work or work out or eat cereal or drink wine or whatever your thing is, like having that is helpful. And then it sounds too like from what you said, and at least what I saw was like searching for places where you may lack intentionality and bringing intentionality to that. So like you said, like people are very right, like it's weird because you don't want to judge people by any means, and I struggle with this as well, but it's like what can you focus on, or being intentional about that and finding something that finds your focus, or like what can you eat or drink that will affect you, right? And some will be like, well, it does feel good to drink wine, or it feels good for me to eat 17 large pizzas. That's not true, but you know what I'm saying.
Oh, that can feel good.
yeah, exactly. At least like right into the last bite, like you get to the last piece, you're like or whatever, and it's like we're not being as intentional as we could be, for whatever, and it's like, that's where like disarray can happen. So,
Definitely. Yeah. Even like just the news too. Like if you turn on the news and it gets you fired up and angry and like, it's like, it's maybe limit the amount that you're consuming, or on Instagram, there's comparison is the thief of joy. If you find yourself scrolling and you're all of a sudden doubting your life and feeling like less than, maybe scroll a little less, or listen to a great podcast, where you feel uplifted and people are championing for you. So stuff like that it is important. It sounds weird saying it to yourself, but I think it is really, the intentionality is where it's at for sure.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's hard. Like it's, because most people have a lot of freedom, and you're like, all right, let's do this. But then it's almost like debilitating, that's like when I first went full time and didn't have a full time job, and I was like, oh, I'm a full time photographer. It's like, oh, this is great. But then you're like, oh, wait, like the freedom of, oh, this isn't due until next week can also be debilitating, because you're like, oh, I will wait until the last minute or whatever, and like getting these things down. And it can just like soak you up and soak up your time and all that kind of stuff. Tell me a little bit. This is so random. Tell me about gymnastics. So were you good at gymnastics? Is this thing? And I should know this, but listen, I know you for the main thing and then a second main thing. And so gymnastics is like number 6.
I know. Yeah. So I actually grew up doing super competitive gymnastics for almost 18 years. I did it in college, and it was a huge part of my life. And I definitely had aspirations to go Olympic level. And I honestly, deep down, knew I was never good enough. But I also think it's like being a part of a sport growing up, and gymnastics is actually more of an isolated sport. It doesn't feel as team oriented until you get to college. At least for me, it was like that. I was always really self-aware and I grew up very accommodating, because the way it's structured with coaches and it's almost like a militant approach to it. And,
Sure.
yes, ma'am, yes, sir. And, I got to do my work and I have to keep progressing every day. And I did develop some skill sets that helped me a lot later in life, and why it's important to be agreeable and to provide that showmanship with everything that you do. You're always performing kind of in a way. But at the same time, I think it also, in that agreeable nature of things, you can sometimes, agree to things that maybe you shouldn't be. And everybody learns as they go. But at least I would say the biggest takeaway was efficiency and time management, because I would go to practice 6 hours a day, or and to fit in your schoolwork and all that kind of stuff. Like, you definitely learn to be structured and get stuff done and not wait or procrastinate. So I got that from it for sure. But yeah, I don't do it as much anymore. I love working out, and it's like the idea of expending energy for me is big.
Sure.
But I know a lot of my friends that grew up in gymnastics kind of all have felt aftermaths in a certain way. And, it's good and bad, but we all have things we go through in childhood that help shape us. And
totally.
Like Tony Robbins says, whatever are the good things that you can take away from childhood, you also have to be grateful for the bad things, because it shaped who you are. So
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I heard this somewhere where water and then different things are affecting where we go, like the river stream kind of thing. Right. So it might be bad and good, and determining your direction. That makes sense. It's and it's one of those things to become so good at something, and then the process to get there. And, again, I'm sure you had a myriad of coaches, and one coach was like, they all had similarities, but then you're like, oh, this coach was not that great, or whatever. Or even like, nobody knows about gymnastics in reality, other than like the experts who are into it. And then you see like a documentary, and they're not making documentaries about the best parts of gymnastics, like which is no fun at all. Because they'd be like, hey, watch the Olympics, like, hey, get pumped, or watch college Olympics or whatever, or gymnastics, or like Dax Shepard's co-host Monica Padman, gymnast, state champion.
Yep.
So you two are the only ones I know.
I love it, but you also kind of, I think when you're in a sport, you learn to train, and that like, if you want to get to here, you have to do these things every day and put the effort in. And what it did teach me was, with design and becoming a designer, that you can learn how to be a great sketch artist. You can learn how to be a great designer. You don't just have that skill that you don't necessarily have to just have that skill that you're born with. The idea of treating your career like it's a sport and practicing at it every day, it was a big thing for me, because I'm definitely someone that needs validation. And so those little moments of progress and success take you to the next step, and you are always getting better, so I love that parallel for sure, which is something I took from gymnastics for sure.
That's a pun. You love that parallel. So that's really good. I want to talk about fashion, kind of getting towards the end in a fun way as much as you can. But like, what's one of the biggest things you've learned about the actual fashion industry, that both in actual designing and CYA, if you will, for up and coming fashion people, or people who want to design clothes, or design just things they wear for themselves?
Yeah. Fashion is, in a way, for me, identity seeking. And so is design, because I'm always looking to tell a story, but ultimately the most important thing is connecting, whether you're connecting with yourself or you're connecting with somebody else. And, it's just like when you're talking to a friend when you're a kid growing up, and you're like, oh, you like pizza? I love pizza. It's just like, I want that commonality and the relatability. And so everything that I've always done with artistic, expression has been with the intention of someone seeing it and connecting to it. And it's funny, because I never considered myself really like, oh, I'm super fashionable. And like, I always felt like if I could choose, I would want to be in like pajamas, or I'd want to be in a ball gown, like there's almost like no in between for me for a long time. But then as I grew and started to really appreciate the expression of it, and where you find bits of your identity, I see why it's so important. And I think for anyone wanting to pursue it, this is going to sound so cheesy, but you just have to look for something that is authentic to you. And it really comes from a place of honesty, because art is an act of honesty, whether it's provocative or it's something that is graceful and feminine. It really has to have that honesty behind it. And there's a tendency too, I think, in design for there to be a dilution effect where, whatever's selling in the marketplace, oh, we've got to start doing that, and you get into this momentum of chasing sales and chasing trends. And that's where I tend to get a little lost, because at the end of the day, you then find yourself almost, copying or following what the masses are doing. And if you can really tap into that creative expression and do the work of, okay, I'm inspired, but what is my interpretation of that and what can be really honest for me? I think that's a super special thing.
Yeah, no, totally. Trying to chase trends is like, at least on the photography side, and I imagine any creative expression, it's like, it's exhausting, like if you're trying to chase these trends, because there's like the money side of it, right? So you're like, oh, I fear that if I don't chase this trend, I will not bring in income,
right.
That's like, I guess, the big fear. And it's like, there are times I have no idea in the fashion industry, but there are times when like you take a photo or take a certain booking or take a, start like flat lay design these days, right, is like massive, in wedding world. So it's like you're doing these things, because it's part of the trend, it might not be part of your expression or your creativity, but you're kind of like, you're too scared not to. But I also wonder, like, what you're saying, and what I would tell people too is like, what about the fear of not being yourself, or the fear of not expressing your own creativity and sticking to your guns, if you will, whether it's photography, design, etc. I think that's important.
Yeah. And like the inspiration factor of it is great. And like looking at the way trends change is wonderful. And I think it's really just about like, what's real to you. And it's like, okay, you want to give that trend a try, go for it. It's not like I'm saying, oh, or don't be a trend chaser, but it's more like, what is your expression of it? And when you do give it a try, make it feel like it speaks to you in a way that is, like, okay, this is me. I'm liking this, and how can I interpret this in a way that's authentic to me? But we'll see how things progress, because fashion is ever changing and it's also very cyclical at the same time. And I think the wedding industry is such a different animal in general from mainstream. But I love blending the two. Like that's like one of my favorite things, is to put those contemporary pieces and moments into a very high fashion, like special moment. But yeah, it's my dream to get back to it someday.
Yeah. Well, I mean, could you, you love ball gowns, right? Like, would your dream just be to like start designing your own stuff and be like, hey, it's me, it's mine. Like that's all it is. We're not even selling it. Like, we have a big post-pandemic party that everything's back to somewhat level normal, and you're like, I want to look awesome, I'm just going to make my own thing.
Yes, I would love that. that would be a very fun dream to live out, for sure. Everyone sitting around awesome. In ball gowns.
Yeah, right, totally. And just, drinking water and kind of having a bad meal, but it looks fancy and we're here together. Yeah. But the decorations look cool, and you're at like the Temple of Dundor in New York City, and you're like, whatever, it is what it is. I've shot those balls. I have not attended. That's really cool. Tell me about the podcast. You and your fiance started the podcast in the pandemic, and I know nothing about your fiance other than he's super good looking.
Thank you.
Yeah. She's like, I claim that. Thank you.
He also, it's just so funny because he really does have like this heart of gold. And when you really look at a lot of Instagram, there's such a tendency to see things surface level, and I think what's great about a podcast is it invites the depth of conversation and a lot more context to content. And we've really enjoyed doing it together, but I've particularly loved us being able to grow together and then know that we're learning as we go. And with every new platform that comes out, I think the more people that enter it and give it a try, the better. It creates, again, more of that community. So we didn't really have this full like strategy of, okay, this is what our podcast is going to be. I think we entered the market with the hopes that we could provide some value, but also learn a lot from it. And after both of us have been doing Instagram for a really long time. And, nothing is ever really a sure thing. And especially in the situation I'm in right now, it's like, a lot of things can be taken from you. And to have a footprint that definitely feels like is 100% yours, and then to have it be taken, it just makes you want to look for more things that you can do and put your effort into. So for us, our podcast, we like to give moments of positivity and growth and things that we're doing that are helpful. Maybe it'll be helpful for you too. And then invite people that are entertaining and, doing things that are great for them that could be great for someone else too. So we try to invite those guests on as well, but we're also adapting as we go. So it's been really fun. Yeah. And the advertisement model too is very new for us, and how you choose to partner with people and things like that. And I think it really is important to choose partners that make sense for you. It's not just like it's random, you want it to kind of weave into what your journey is. So that's been interesting too.
Yeah. Can we dive into a little bit of that just for fun? Like, have you been doing, with some of your sponsors and stuff like that, are you doing like a CPM model, or are you doing like more of an affiliate model where it's, pay-per-click kind of thing?
It's more sponsor based. So like advertisement based. And we've actually only done one together. My fiance has done a few through Instagram. We're very new to market, but we've been exploring a lot of opportunities. And I think in this current state I've been in, I've been really scared to do things. So it's been an interesting time, but at least looking forward to what kind of partnerships make sense for it, and how to make it so that it's meaningful for whoever's listening. And I think that's a lot, that has a lot to do with understanding your audience too, and what might add value to their lives, not just from the content and the dialogue you're creating, but also like the products you're using or things that you're choosing to partner with. I'm sure a lot of people are way more advanced in this than we are. So we're definitely hoping to share that as we go. I think that's important to, be transparent in as well, as like, you definitely want to create new avenues of income, and how you do it is important, like the purpose behind it and all that. So
totally. I think I was kind of asking more the nitty gritty. If you don't mind, it depends on the sponsor too. Like some sponsors, in the podcast space, and I think people love podcasts even still because it has the highest CPM rating out of any like social media or online platform. But I was just kind of asking, without giving any sponsor names or whatever, like, are they paying you just as a blanket ad, and saying, all right, we just want to advertise because they have this many listens? Or are you doing more of like hey, if the podcast community gives us, 1,000 clicks, we'll give you a cut for every purchase? Or some are both, but I know in most podcasts, it's just CPM driven, like, hey, we'll pay you a flat fee for to have 2 minutes for your audience.
Yeah, the CPM model is actually the only thing we've done so far, but it was also tied to the Instagram because the weaving of the platforms. So you can do like a multi-platform partnership. Also included in the Instagram model as well, because we're really just also starting with our podcast, and we know that. I think a lot of people enter podcasts because, like, okay, everyone's getting on the podcast, bandwagon. Let's figure out what our expression of this looks like and what our show might look like. But we never entered it with like, oh, it's going to be quick returns and we're just going to start, making all this money. I think we really went into it like, let's give this a try and let's see how it could work with our existing models and things like that. So we weren't really expecting a whole big return right away. And we'll see where it goes for sure. But it's nice to have Instagram with it. And, if you don't, that's okay too.
Yeah, no, that's super smart. I think too. Yeah. For you guys to have larger followings, even with a new profile, if you will, an updated profile, it's like you still have a large enough following where you can kind of leverage that and say, hey, our podcast is our new baby, and we want to push that a little bit, and the audience is different, but also we're happy to, have a multi-platform kind of thing. I think that's cool. I think it encourages people to go on all platforms too, because even with Instagram and Facebook, a lot of it changes over the years. And if you put everything into just one platform, the idea of ever losing it or feeling like that's all that you have, that encourages diversity in your grander portfolio or your social footprint
So I think that's a good message just in case.
Yeah, totally. I mean, for anybody, like if you're an entrepreneur, I think our audience here is wedding photographers. Like if your lead source, if your number one lead source is 100% of your leads, it might be time to look at some other avenues and try to just build them up. You don't have to take anything away from the number one thing, but just start building some other things, some other referral sources. So that makes sense.
Yeah. And also you just reminded me, it's what's I think really interesting about social media and influence is that anyone can do it. Anyone can be influential. And it sometimes can feel daunting to say, oh, look at these people with millions and millions of followers and look at these people with, it's so much about the quality and the engagement that you have. It's like if you have an account of 60 people, but those 60 people are your like diehard friends and are word of mouth references and they love, their quality. It's like that is influence in itself, and it's really interesting to look at it that way and where the reach is and how it is changing because it's really not just in the masses.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. Well, hey, we're going to let you go. What's your podcast name and where can people go to find that and find your new profile and hear updates? Yeah.
So right now my account is at All That Glitters on the gram. It's a really long name. And my fiance and I, when we first opened the account, we're like, well, this is obviously our podcast account because we had our perspective Instagrams. And now, maybe one day I will change it to whatever new name is. But we'll see. I don't know. That's where you can find me. And then my dog has an account as well at Miss Winnie. And then I can't say the last part of that name. So
That's okay. That's also, and
she is a fun little account as well.
I love that. And your podcast is All That Glitters, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Beautiful. Yeah. Well, a girl you might know, thank you so much for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure. And I'm wishing and hoping good things for you. And hopefully if we have a new name or if things get updated, we'll come back on and we'll hang out and we'll talk and it'll be awesome.
Love it. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Guys, thank you so much for checking out The Bearded Hog. It really means a lot. If you can, leave a like on the video. If you want to see more videos, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications on when new videos come out immediately. Have a wonderful day, guys, and keep being awesome.